ever get the feeling someone's watching you? Not like in a crowded room or anything, but like really watching you? That's what happened to me at the carnival last summer. Only, this wasn't some random person in the crowd. This was someone I'd never forget. I had spent the night winning at every game booth I could. You know, those rigged games where no one ever wins? Well, I was on fire. I had a bag full of stuffed animals, candy, all the usual junk. But there was one game that caught my eye right at the end of the night, a prize booth at the far end of the fair, almost hidden in the shadows. It didn't look like the other games. There were no flashy lights, no music blaring from speakers, and the booth itself looked old, really old. The sign above it was so faded you could barely read it, but it said something like, "Win the ultimate prize." Behind the counter stood a man. He didn't say a word, didn't try to get me to play like all the other booth workers did. He just stood there, smiling this weird, crooked smile. His eyes were dark, too dark, and they never left mine as I approached. I was cocky at this point, feeling invincible. So I walked up, slapped down my last ticket, and asked what the game was. "Simple," he said in this low, gravelly voice. "You just have to guess." "Guess what?" I asked, confused. He pointed to a row of prizes behind him. But these weren't stuffed animals or cheap toys. No, these were things like watches, wallets, even a pair of old leather shoes. Weird, random things. "Guess which one belongs to you," he said, his grin widening. I laughed it off, thinking it was some kind of joke. But something about the way he was looking at me made me uncomfortable. Still, I figured I'd play along. I pointed to a watch, a beat-up old thing that looked like it had seen better days. "That one," I said, not really expecting anything. The man's grin faded. He looked at the watch, then back at me. "That's not yours." I shrugged, ready to leave, but then he leaned in close, his breath hot and sour against my face. "But this is," he whispered, reaching under the counter. He pulled out something small, something wrapped in a faded cloth. Slowly, he unwrapped it, revealing a key. A small, rusted key that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. I stared at it, confused. "What's that?" The man's smile returned, but this time, it wasn't just unsettling. It was sinister. "It's yours," he said. "You lost it a long time ago." I didn't recognize the key, but there was something about it, something I couldn't put my finger on. I stared at it, trying to remember if I had ever owned a key like that. I hadn't, at least not that I could recall. But the way the man looked at me, like he knew something I didn't, it freaked me out. I think you've got the wrong guy," I said, taking a step back. The man's smile didn't waver. "No," he whispered, his voice sending chills down my spine. "This is yours. You'll need it soon." I wanted to leave. Every instinct was screaming at me to get out of there, but I felt rooted to the spot, unable to move. My eyes locked on that key, still sitting in his hand, and I swear for a second it looked familiar. Not the way you remember an old toy or a forgotten childhood friend. No, this was different. It was like something from a nightmare you couldn't quite remember, but couldn't shake. "I don't want it," I stammered, turning to leave. But before I could take another step, the man's hand shot out, grabbing my wrist with a grip that was ice cold. His face changed, the smile dropping entirely, and for the first time, his dark eyes met mine with a seriousness that terrified me. "You will need it," he said, and there was no mistaking the threat in his voice. I yanked my arm away, stumbling back from the booth. As I hurried away, I heard his low voice calling after me, "You'll be back. It always comes back." I didn't stop running until I reached the bright lights of the main fairground. My heart was pounding, and I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting him to be right behind me. But when I turned back toward where his booth had been, it was gone, just like that. There was no booth, no man, nothing. It was like it had never been there. I didn't tell anyone about it. I figured no one would believe me. I mean, how do you explain something like that? But later that night, when I emptied my pockets at home, I froze. There, tangled up with my change and the prize tickets, was the key. The same rusted ancient key he had tried to give me. Somehow, it had found its way into my pocket. I still don't know what it unlocks. I've kept it hidden away, far in the back of a drawer where I don't have to look at it. But sometimes, late at night, I swear I hear something, like a faint metallic scraping, like a lock turning. And every time, I get this feeling deep in my gut that one day I'm going to find out what that key is for. But I'm not sure I want to know. This happened when I was 17, working my first summer job at a carnival. I thought it would be fun, free rides, free food, and I got to hang out with my friends after hours. But one night, I learned that the carnival wasn't as innocent as it seemed. It was late, and the carnival was shutting down for the night. I was one of the last employees to leave, helping clean up around the food stalls. That's when I noticed him, a man sitting alone at one of the picnic tables near the carousel. He was older, maybe in his 50s, with gray hair, but he was wearing this dirty brown coat despite the warm weather. At first, I thought he was just a late straggler, maybe waiting for someone. But the longer I watched him, the more uneasy I felt. The way he just sat there, motionless, staring at the carousel. It didn't feel right. I walked over, thinking I'd ask if he needed help or if he was waiting for a ride. But as I got closer, I noticed something strange. His face. He had this look, like he wasn't really there, like he was lost in some distant thought. His eyes were wide, unblinking, staring at the carousel like it held some kind of dark secret. "Excuse me, sir," I said, trying not to sound scared. "The carnival's closed. Do you need a ride or something?" He didn't respond. He didn't even blink. He just kept staring at the carousel. His lips were moving, but the words didn't make any sense. It was like he was mumbling to himself in some language I didn't recognize. I backed away slowly, telling myself I didn't need to deal with this. I turned to leave, but something stopped me. I felt this weird compulsion to look back, like I had to see what he was doing. And when I did, he was gone. Just gone. The table was empty, the seat he had been in still slightly swinging back and forth. I should have left right then, but curiosity got the better of me. I walked to the carousel, the one he had been staring at so intently, and there, tucked between the painted horses, was a small photograph. I picked it up, and my blood ran cold. It was a photo of the man, but it wasn't from tonight. It was old, worn, like it had been left there for years. The carnival wasn't even in the picture. It was just him, standing in front of some nondescript building, wearing that same dirty coat. I dropped the photo and ran. I didn't tell anyone, not my boss, not my friends. I didn't want to seem crazy, but every time I closed my eyes that night, I saw him, sitting there, staring, mumbling. I quit the job the next day, and I haven't set foot in a carnival since. You know how everyone has a childhood memory that sticks with them? Well, I have one, but I wish I didn't. I was 10 when my family took me to the county fair. The lights, the sounds, the smell of popcorn, and the laughter. It was magical at first. But something happened that night that I've never been able to forget. Something I'm not sure I'll ever understand. I was standing in line for the Ferris wheel, clutching the last few tickets I had for the night, when I saw him, a man standing off to the side near the funhouse. He wasn't doing anything unusual at first glance, just holding a bright red balloon, watching the crowd. But something about him felt wrong. He didn't belong there. He wore this dark, outdated suit, a fedora pulled low over his face, and his eyes, God, his eyes, were hidden behind these old-fashioned, thick-rimmed glasses. He didn't move, didn't smile, didn't offer kids balloons or anything like that. He just stood there, staring at the crowd. But then his head turned directly toward me. For a second, I convinced myself it was nothing, just some carnival worker trying to sell balloons or entertain the kids. But as I moved forward in line, his gaze didn't waver. He kept staring right at me. I was a kid, so I tried to shrug it off. I went on the Ferris wheel, laughed with my friends, and told myself I was just imagining things. But every time the wheel brought me to the top, I could see him. That man standing in the same spot, still holding that red balloon, still staring at me. He hadn't moved an inch. I got off the ride, unsettled, but determined to ignore him. I decided to head to the game booths and try to win a stuffed animal or something to distract myself. But as I walked through the crowded fairgrounds, there he was, closer now, still holding that balloon, still watching me. No one else seemed to notice him. It was like he was invisible to everyone but me. I told my parents about him, but they brushed it off. Just a balloon seller, they said. Nothing to worry about. But I knew something was wrong. I went to the bathroom, thinking I could lose him for a while. The carnival lights and sounds were muffled inside, and for a moment, I thought I was safe. But when I came out, there he was, standing just outside the bathroom. The balloon hovered in the air, still tied to his hand. He was so close now I could see his mouth moving, like he was whispering something under his breath. But I couldn't hear what it was. I ran as fast as I could through the fair, dodging people, knocking into booths. But no matter how far I went, every time I glanced back, there he was, closer, watching, following. Finally, I found my parents again. I begged them to leave, and thankfully, they agreed. But as we drove away from the carnival, I saw him standing at the edge of the parking lot, his balloon still bobbing in the breeze. He never took his eyes off me. I never went back to that carnival again. And to this day, I avoid red balloons. I don't know who he was or what he wanted, but I have this terrible feeling that if I had stayed one more minute, I wouldn't have made it out of there.